Hello everyone and welcome to our tutorial. This tutorial is a build on the events application that we are creating, but this specific video is for registering users to the application. Now, whether you're building for events or you're not building at all, this tutorial would help anybody who is trying to build an application that would allow users to register for. As you can see, I have some class already that already is for, because of the application we've already started, but forget about those classes because what I'm going to teach you here is similar to what I've already created, and it can be applied if you're just creating a normal registration for your own application. So the first thing we've done is we've created an activity. An activity is called register. If you look in the resolution folder, we've got a layout called activity register. Now to create an activity or a new activity, you just need to click on new activity, and we chose an empty activity. Now in this registration application, we're going to give a user the form to add their full name, their email address, their password, their phone number, and an organization that they belong to. Now the reason why we're doing this way is because in our application, we are trying to allow users to add an event to an application. So in using that event, now we have, we want them to be able, we have an admin and we also have a normal user. Now the admin, when the admin logs in, the admin should be able to add to our events table. But when a normal user logs in, the normal user can only view the events that are available. And later on, we can give the user the opportunity to register for an event and to view the events that they've registered for. So this particular video would help anybody who's trying to create an application to allow somebody to register for any application. So the first thing we're doing is we have to now create a class. So we have to create a class. We already have a DB connect, which is how we connect to a database, but I will take you through it because we already have some methods in there, but I will take you through it. Even if you're a new person, you would understand this application that we're building. Now, the first thing we want to do is want to create a user class. Why are we creating a class? Because it's easier to manage when we use classes. So we create a class called users, and you have to think to yourself that what kind of properties is your user you're going to store in your database, or what kind of information do you request from each and every single user? So the information that we need from every single user is, first of all, my users table would have an integer. Every user will have an ID. So at the University of Northampton, every time somebody registers for the university, they're given a unique ID. That ID, nobody else can have it. There can be many Emmanuels. There's 1,000 Emmanuels in that university, but my ID is very different. So if I'm creating mine, so I'll do private int ID, and then private string, and then what I'm going to have with the columns that I'm going to have in my table, my database table. So private string, and I'm going to have a full name, private string. I'm going to have an email address, private string, organization, private string, phone number, private string, password. Now I'm adding a password to it because if we're letting people register to the database, they need to be able to have a password to log in. So this is what we have. We have a private string, full name, email address, organization, phone number. And the last bit I'm adding to mine application is private string rank. Now you can leave this out. The reason why I'm having rank is because we can either choose to have two tables, one where only admin details will be in it, or we can have another one where it's just a normal users table. And then when we add rank to it, we can specify that if this person is an admin, their rank should be a number 1. If the person is a normal user, their rank will be a number 2. Now, this helps us to just have one table. So whenever a user logs in, we just have to check the rank column to see which integer they have in there. If it's a 1, it means that they're an admin. If there's a 2, it means that they're a normal user. And we can keep on building up and up and up on that. And that helps so that we only have one table to manage. That is why I've added a rank to it. So now I'm going to create getters and setters. Android Studio helps you to be able to create getters and setters. All you have to do is right click in any space, click on generate, click on getter and setter. And then we are going to select all of these. And then Android Studio will create getters and setters for us. Now we also need a constructor. By default, Android Studio creates constructors for you, but I want to be able to construct my objects in a specific way. So I'm going to create a constructor. I'm going to select all of these so that when I'm creating it, I can just pass in through the arguments. So this is how you create a constructor in an Android Studio. If you already know how to create classes, this is how you create getters and setters. So we've created our users class. Now let's go to our DB Connect class. Now, if you are new to this is the first time you're trying to create or connect or create an SQLite open helper or connect to a database, and you want to learn how to do it this way, I will take you through. Now, forget about what we have here right now. This is code I already have in there because it relates to the application we're creating, but you don't have to worry about it. So the first thing you want to do is once you create a new class, you want to call it whatever name you want to call it. I called mine DB Connect. To create a new class, you just have to right click here on the package and then go to Java class and then give it a name, and that will be created. So in my case, I created DB Connect. That is how you're able to see DB Connect here. Now, what I had to do is to extend. This extends keyword means that we're going to get some properties from another class, which means that our class now becomes a baby class, a child class. And then that SQLite open helper is a class that already exists, which gives us the opportunity to have some methods and some properties that we can use to connect to SQLite database. So if you extend that SQLite open helper, what you get is SQLite will bring a red bulb, and that bulb will require you to add two methods. The two methods that SQL will want you to create is an onCreate method and an onUpgrade method. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment these three out so that you'll be able to see the error that SQLite gives me. So when I've done that, SQLite gives me this bulb and it tells me, oh, you need to implement two methods. Now, these two methods is what SQLite is telling me to implement. So if you click OK, you would implement it. Now, once you've implemented it, what you end up having is you will have these two methods in your application. Let me comment out these two. You will have these two applications. What you end up with is just two methods like this. This is exactly what you get. So if you do it this way, this is exactly what you get. Now, Android Studio will give you another error message because it will tell you that, oh, okay, we have a problem. Now, what's the problem? You have to create a constructor. Now, when you click on it, select any of these three. You can select any of these three. I picked the first one. We're going to change it up anyways. Once you click OK, what would actually happen is Android Studio would create you a context with an additional parameters here. All you have to do is just delete all the rest and just leave the context. And then you have this superclass. It usually would say name. Now, let's build on this superclass. So I already have a database created called a DB events manager. That's already what I'm using. Now, there's a table that I created for my table events. So all you have to do, worry about this stage of you trying to create your own registration application is you need to have this DB name. You need to create private static string DB name. You can call it whatever name you want. I've called mine events manager. Forget about this for now. This is because we're creating an event. We have an events table that already exists. Next thing you need to do is you need to create a private static int DB version. This DB version now needs to go inside of here. This DB version, let's say, for example, you created your database the first time. And once you create your database the first time, you made changes to that date. There was no changes made. Now, let's say your application grows and you're making a lot of money and people are now coming to tell you, oh, this would be a nice feature to add. This would be a nice column to add. And then you end up making modifications to your database. the version now changes. So you want an existing user who already has your application with that database that you had, the old one. You want, when the user upgrades the application, you know, there's usually updates for new applications. You want to set that DB version to 2. Once you set that DB version to 2, once the user upgrades or updates the application, SQLite or your Android will notice that, okay, the DB version that I used to have is 1. If it's now changed to 2, it means that there has been some changes. So that DB version helps Android to know that, okay, the database version is different. That is where the on upgrade comes in. That's what we on upgrade comes. That's why we need a private end database version. So in your context, I've added my DB name, which I called it Events Manager. And then I have a DB version here. I've added a DB version here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncomment this query. Now, this query is what I created for my events application, but this query is what I created for my registration. All you have to do is we're creating a string, and our string, we're calling it create table. And then we're adding our database table, which is what we created here. So these, let's start from here. So we're creating a new table. Now, the table that I'm creating, my table is going to be called table users. Remember, we're creating a table. And then every table needs an ID. I think it needs an ID. And then these are the columns that I'm going to be using. Notice how these columns that I have here match up with the properties that I gave my user class, because we're going to store the same information in a database. So I have the same thing. So I have a user ID, a full name. These are variables to store my column names. So ID, full name, email address, organization, phone number, password, and rank. These are the same as what I have created in my users.java. Now, what I'm doing here is, at this stage, is I am creating a string called query users. And query users, I'm creating a table. So it's create table. And then I'm concatenating with the properties that I've created here. So create tables, table users, user ID, email address, organization, phone number, and password. And then what I'm also doing is I am specifying what that column, what value the column is going to hold. So for my user ID, I am saying that we're going to have a primary key, and it's going to be auto incremented, so that whenever a new user adds to our users table, it goes from 1, 2, 3, 4. And then full name, I'm making that into a text. Email address, I'm making that into a text. Organization, I'm making that into a text. Phone number, I'm making that into a text. Password, I'm making that into a text. And my rank is going to be an integer. You can make it a string if you want, but I made mine an integer. So if you want to make a string, just put text there. And then the next thing I'm doing is I'm calling SQLite database dot execute SQL. And then I'm passing in query users. So this is where the code actually executes. So when you run your application, it runs this onCreate method, and then it executes SQLite SQL, and then that table is created. In our on upgrade, I'm going to uncomment this. So in our upgrade, we're just going to do SQLite database. What we're setting here is if the table already exists, drop it. We don't need a new one. The same thing for this drop table if it exists for the table users, because I'm creating 2 tables in that case. And then what you need to add is this onCreate SQLite database. So when you pass that in, it goes here and it creates it. So think about it in this sense. When our on upgrade runs, it calls this onCreate method, and then we pass in SQLite database, and SQLite database come in here and execute this command that we have here. So if you've managed to get to this far, look at the code. All we're doing is just create a simple queries and we're running it. So next thing we need to do is we need to create a method which would allow us to be able to add to our our table. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a public void, and then my add is going to be called add user. If you're somebody who is following this from the events manager, you see that this code will be very, very similar to what we've already done before. But if you're new and you're trying to learn how to create a registration, this code would also help you. So I'm calling my method add user. Now, add user is going to take in an object. And what object is going to take in? The user's object. So I'm going to pass in the user's object so that once a user put their details in the form, we're passing that object, and we're going to use that object to add to the database. So the first thing I need to do is I need to create an SQLite database, DB, an object from the SQLite database, DB, equals this dot get writable. Why writable? Because we're writing to the database. Then I'm going to create content values. Content values are key value pairs. So they store a key and a value. So let's think about it in this way. In our table, our columns are basically keys, and then we're going to add values to it. So content values allows us to hold key value pairs, so we can match up that I want to put the name of that person inside this column. So content values hold key and value pairs. So equals new content values. This is how you create content values. And then content values comes with some methods. And one of the methods that we're going to use is the put method. So values.put. Now, when you do that, Android Studio already tells you that, okay, this put method needs a key and a value. So what it's basically saying is it needs the columns that we're about to create. So the columns or the values that we're about to put inside the columns. So our key, in this case, our first key would be our full name. So full name, just passing the full name variable. And our value is going to be users.get full name. This is coming from our object class. Okay. And then we're going to repeat the same step, values.put. What's the next one? Is email address, I believe. Email users.get email address, values.put. And next one, I believe, is, let's check at the top just to see, is organization. Users.get organization. And then we have values.put. And then we have next one is, I believe, is phone number. So phone number is users.get phone number. And the next one that we're going to have is values.put. We're going to have is password and then rank. Password and then rank. So what we're going to have is password users.get password, and then values.put. And then we're going to have is rank, and then we're going to do users.get rank. So these methods that you're seeing here, .get full name, .get email address, .get organization, are all methods that the getters, where we used to create our getter and setter. So it's going to return whatever we set the organization to, whatever we set the username to. So back to our DB Connect. And then the last thing we need to do is do a db.insert. And you see db.insert tells you exactly what you need is you need a string table, you need a table name, you need a null column hack, and a content values. The null column hack, usually we put null in there. So I'm going to pass in my DB table users. I'm going to pass in the null for the null column hack. And then the content values, we named ours values. So this code here would automatically, if you were to create a form and allow a user to add details, this form would automatically add to our database. So brilliant. So we've now created an add users method, simple add users method, which will allow us to be able to add users to the table. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create one which would allow us to be able to, let's say we want to update, a user wants to update their details. So we want to do public void add update users. We can do users and then passing the user object again. See how useful that user object is now. SQLite DB equals this dot get writable database. The code is essentially going to be the same as here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the same code here and pass it in here. Users. Now the only difference is that the rank, we don't want to allow a user to update their rank. And the reason why we don't want to allow users to update their rank is because if they are able to update their rank, it means that they will be able to change their rank from a normal admin to a normal user, but you want to be the one in charge of that, or whoever's in charge of the application. But for the purpose of this application, I'm just going to leave it just like that. We're going to give the user, we don't want to give the user the opportunity to change their rank, but it is completely fine. We will let the user be able to change their rank, or when they are registering, they can just put admin and they can just put normal user. So you can let them choose whether to be a rank, to be a normal admin or a normal user. That is up to you. And for the purpose of this application, I'm just giving you different ideas. So this update users would allow us to update the user. The user will be able to update their full name, their email address, their organization, their phone number, and their password, and their rank. And I'm just going to do values dot put, which is the last, no, actually, that's all the columns that we need. We're going to do db dot insert, so that we used insert to add to the table. So we use update in that case to update what we need. Now, when you choose the update method, it's telling us that the first thing that we need to pass in is our table. The second thing that we need to pass in is our content values. And then the next thing we need to pass in is our where clause. And the next thing is the argument for the where clause. So our table is db table users. Our values is called values. Our content value is called values. Our where clause is an ID equals, and then I'm going to put a placeholder. Now this right here, this as question mark here is a placeholder for the next argument, which is what we're going to do is we're going to do new string, and then we're going to do users dot get ID. Now we're going to have an error. The reason we're having an error is because SQL runs in strings. It runs the item as a string, and it's requesting that we use a string. But our users.get ID is currently an integer. So we need to convert that to a string so that it will be able to match up the ID. So what we need to do in this case is we need to just do string.value of, and then wrap the value of around our users.get ID. And that is how we update a user. That is, we just literally done an update user. So the user can update their details once they're able to log in. The next thing we want to do here is we want to create one which would allow us to be able to delete a user from the database. Now, all we have to do in this scenario is we would just have SQLite DB, and then we'll do db.delete, and we need to pass in the DB table. And the next thing is the where clause, again, same as the other one. So you can generally just copy this code here because it's the same. The only thing that's going to request you don't need is the values. And then let's also check. Okay, let me go back. It's asking me, let me check what, okay. Yeah, it's fine. All we need to do is just pass in here, take away values, and then replace this with delete, because the delete button is similar to the update. The only difference is the update, we pass in values. So the only difference between this is this has 3 arguments. This has 4 arguments, and we're passing the values. So update and delete are similar. Now, what I want to show you guys is, well, I want to check if the user has successfully been able to update their details. I want to give a message back. So if I want to give a message back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to store the end results of, I want to know, because whenever you submit to SQLite or SQL database, it always returns you with a number. That number specifies if it has successfully done it or it wasn't able to do it. So it returns you an integer. Now, if the integer is positive, it means that it successfully did it. If it's a negative, it means that it didn't work. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an integer, and I'm going to store the response from the SQL transaction or query. So I'm going to call it end results equals db.update. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do if my end result is greater than 0, which means that obviously it returned a positive number, I'm going to return true. Else, I'm going to return false. So this is just a check just to make sure that, you know, it inserted successfully. Now I'm getting an error because when I created my method, I made it a void. Now, when you make a method a void, it means that you're not returning anything. So what am I returning? I'm returning a true or false, and true or false data types are called Boolean. So I need to make my method a Boolean. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat the same thing for my delete. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to paste this here, and I'm going to get the int end result. And I'm going to store the result back. Stat. And I'm going to change my public void to a Boolean. So you can see here that what we have here is code, which is very simple to manage and very simple to work with. And it's actually quite easy to manage with, actually, because you can understand the scenario that I've gone through, that you realize that, oh, actually, this code is the same. That's why I always tell people that when you're working in this way, you'll be able to understand it quicker and it makes sense, because what you actually realize is that, oh, I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again. And you realize that after a while, it sticks into your head. So if you've managed to get to this far, what we've just done is created an add user, we've created an update user, and we've created a delete user. Now, the next thing we need to do is we have now a user will be able to register. The admin can be able to delete a normal user if they wanted to, or the user can delete themselves and then shut themselves from the application. And the user can also update their details. Now, what if a user is now trying to log in? Well, what I want us to first to do is that I want us to create the registration form first, and then we'll be able to see if that registration form works with this code that we've just created. So I will see you in the next video.